Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Hell Road Podcast. This is episode number 18. I'm Ethan.
I'm Paul.
And we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to both of our hearts, I think, today.
Yes.
Driving slow cars fast. You may have heard of this theme, this idea of driving slow vehicles fast. Who would have come up with such a preposterous idea? But I think there's a lot of people that are into it. So we should probably talk about it. What do you think? Yes. Slow cars fast. I mean, just judging from the vehicles that we have in our stables, you can see that we're a fan of this approach. So I think that'll be a fun topic for today. But before we get started, if you, the listener, would do us a favor, could you please rate us on iTunes or whatever your favorite podcast provider is? And if you're feeling generous, maybe a quick review about what you like about the show. That would be super awesome. It would help the podcast get recommended to other people, which we would really appreciate. So if you do that, we really thank you very much.
Yes.
That
would be awesome.
So I guess before we dive into the topic of the day, should we talk about what's been going on with us in terms of our vehicles?
Sure.
Do you have any news? I heard there's some floor mat news, big news going on in the...
Huge news.
Yeah.
This is... Yep. I think the lead-in image for the promotion for this episode is going to be my WeatherTech floor mats I got for my Fit.
Wow, and this is not a sponsored podcast. No, it's just you actually like WeatherTech. They make good stuff.
They do. And the Honda Fit that I bought did not come with floor mats because I bought it used, and it's got a very interesting layout, I guess you would say, in the passenger and driver footwells, where there's this weird
I remember that.
It's like a raised humpy curve thing, I guess.
Humpy curve.
And so you can't just put a regular floor mat in it, or else it'll just fold over and get stuck under the gas pedal and just turn into a big old fiery mess.
Yeah.
So
unintended acceleration.
Yep. So I got a set, just the fronts for the Fit, and they fit great. And
how much did that run you? I'm just curious.
$115.
Okay.
For just the set of fronts, and I think it was $150 if I wanted to do the back. But the back's just like a flat thing. I can just
you
put
could
a
probably
carpet remnant back there or something. And the kids' feet don't touch back there yet. So
sure. I was just trying to think, because I bought some really, really terrible AutoZone floor mats for my Nova. And I think they've been outgassing for about a year. So every time I drive the car, it kind of leaves me with a headache. But I probably should have upgraded to something slightly better, because they do slide around a lot. It's kind of, you get what you pay for.
I wonder if WeatherTech makes a floor mat for a 1986 Chevy Nova twin cam.
88.
I'm sorry. 88. I apologize. That would be interesting to see, that if you email them, hey, I got this.
Yes.
Do you have this laser cut, perfectly fitted floor mat? It's actually not a floor mat though. They call it a liner, and it's kind of true, because it kind of goes up high on the sides and stuff. And we'll see how well it holds up. I'm sure it'll hold up just fine for the 3 days of rain we get here in Southern California.
Sure, exactly. Do you have any idea if they make any OEM parts for some of these companies? Because I just was thinking about the floor mats I have in my 2005 Scion XB are somehow, after 225,000 miles, are just perfect. And I'm not sure why. Even the driver's side is not even worn through. So I'm curious if there's other, if they make factory parts, or who's making the Scion XB floor mats, because I want to.
Yeah, that's pretty good for a floor mat for 225,000 to be.
Maybe we have really soft shoes or something. I'm not really sure.
I don't know. I typically tear through floor mats just the way that my feet rest in the footwell. I did that. I went through 2 or 3 sets in my Mini Cooper, and then my Outback. For as short of time as I owned it, I had to switch out the carpeted mats to the all-weather mats that came with it, because I wore through them. So I tear them up.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Let
me borrow the Scion for a week, and we'll see if I tear through the floor mat.
So you got some floor mats. This week I've had the luxury of being able to drive around in a 2020 Kia Telluride SX with Prestige package, all-wheel drive.
Prestige.
Yes, the Prestige package. It was gives you a few kind of depends on how much luxury you want. You get this kind of faux suede headliner, which is pretty neat looking, but maybe not necessary, and a few other things. But yeah, it's been super nice. I mean, I know that Kia has been making much better vehicles over the last maybe decade. If you're sort of thinking about like a 1992 Kia Sophia or something like that, you might be like, oh yeah, Kias suck. And
unless you're us, and we're like, hell yeah, let's get that Sophia.
Totally. Yeah. I never even used to see Sophias back in the day. So I haven't seen one in ages.
Yeah. They're gone.
But yeah, they're all gone. Yeah. And I don't think they were particularly reliable either.
No.
But yeah, that's probably why Kia started doing these really spectacular warranties, because they're like, oh, we got to bring back people's perception of, let them know that they can feel safe buying a Kia. But yeah, it's really, really nice. Interior is like almost Volvo level of style.
Oh, wow.
It's really, really nice in there. It's got fake wood, but when you're just looking at it, it looks nice. If you touch it, it doesn't exactly feel like wood, but the leather seats are super comfortable. Yeah, overall, I've been really, really impressed with that vehicle. I think if they haven't already, I think they're going to sell a ton of these things.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few of them out driving around on the road already, and that's not typical of a new car. Like something comes out, like a new car is released, and it could be a long time before I'd see another one on the road. But in this instance, like with the Tellurides, I see a couple of them a day, and again, it's probably just the area that I live in or that I commute to. But I'll see a few of them. I'm like, oh, there's a new Telluride.
Yeah, well, and obviously everybody knows that gas prices are pretty reasonable, and families are flocking to these types 3-row SUVs because nobody wants a minivan anymore, which is silly because minivans are actually really useful and easier to get into the third row. But I will say this, the Telluride is got a pretty nice size third row, and we took it camping. We drove up to Big Bear. We had 4 people in the car, my wife, my daughter, and our friend. And we fit all of our camping gear, tents and sleeping bags and food and stove, like everything you need for, a couple nights of camping, we were able to easily fit in the back there.
Nice.
So yeah, and it's funny because it's a mid-size SUV. So kind of think like, I think it's actually, is it smaller than a CX-9 in terms of overall dimensions? I'm not sure.
It looks big. When I see them, they look big. And I think that's something they've done with like the packaging of the car, like making that there's a lot of bold things on the car, like with the headlights and the taillights and
the very wide grille.
Yeah. It looks big, but it's still classified as a midsize, huh?
It's still classified as a midsize. And if you kind of stacked it up against other vehicles in the class, it would probably appear the largest, maybe just in terms of its stance or whatever, but it's not actually the largest. But that said, interior dimensions in terms of legroom and headroom, it's maybe not class leading, but maybe close. It might possibly be class leading in legroom. I will say this, that in the back, I could sit in the third row and be relatively comfortable. I have enough headroom.
Wow.
I'm 6'3", so I'm a little bit taller, but if the seat in front of me wasn't pushed all the way back, I'd be okay back there for a couple hours, but probably no more than that.
Huh. That's pretty good. My sister-in-law has a 2018 Pilot and with a third row, and the third row seat is meant for, the older kids to go in because it's you don't really want to put an adult back there. Huh. Well, this is pretty awesome.
There's 3 seatbelts back there. I wouldn't try to put 3 adults back there. That would be a recipe for disaster. But the seats fold up. The second row folds up pretty easily, so you can get back there. And I think part of what's going on with the design of this car is that it's just it's sort of a very boxy upright shape. Whereas if you compared it to like a Mazda CX-9, that's kind of swoopy, and you're really cutting off the headroom in the back and the cargo area, the usable cargo area in the back. So I think just making it more of a box shape in all areas is just giving it a lot more space on the inside. It's like I've driven a CX-9, and that even in the driver's seat, it feels a little bit more claustrophobic, especially in the third row. I say that the CX-9 is probably a little bit more fun to drive, but this is just way more useful. And I would say that the interior quality, at least in terms of the design, maybe not fit and finish, but at least in terms of design, the Telluride definitely matches the CX-9, and the CX-9 has a really nice interior.
That's something that Mazda's really kind of prided themselves on the last 5-6 years. It's really pushing for more elegance, I guess we could say.
Yeah, the new Mazda 3 interior is really, really nice.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Which is,
but anyway,
great for them, but they kind of pushed away from their whole sporty image to more of a elegance image, I guess. But
yeah, I think it's like, the cars, obviously they do make an attempt to make them fun to drive, but it doesn't sound like they have any initiative to do a Mazda Speed 3 or, even the Mazda Speed 6. That car was really cool. I think that those days are done for them, at least until they are not like such a small automaker,
Yeah, no, I agree. They'll come out with something again in the future, hopefully,
I hope so.
It would be nice to see that. I mean, obviously they have the Miata or the MX-5 as they call it, but they need to have more sporty. I just remember the good old days when it was like the RX-8, the Protege MP3 that was out, the Speed 3, Speed 6.
Yeah,
it was awesome.
They definitely had some people there and some initiative that wanted to keep that going. And I guess they're just relying on the Miata to kind of carry that torch forward, I guess.
Yeah. Well, cool.
Well, anyway.
So I'm glad the Telluride was as cool as it was. Now, going from the day-to-day driving like the your XB to this 2020, now that you've had it for about a week, right?
Yeah.
All those newer amenities are so nice, right? Like I'm sure this thing has Apple CarPlay and although.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because my Scion, I put a stereo in there that has CarPlay, so that actually out of all my vehicles, that one probably has the best interactive system, way better than the Prius that I have.
Oh yes, I forgot about the Prius.
Yes, yeah, we don't need to talk about that. So there's a lot of things that are really nice, like it's super quiet. That's a really great thing about this vehicle. The Scion, it's funny. The Scion is incredibly, incredibly loud. And moving from that to the Prius, I still, like when my daughter's in the backseat of the Prius, I can't hear her talk over the roar of the tires and the wind noise. And you'd think a Prius should be pretty quiet.
Yeah.
Then going to the Telluride, it's like, oh, wow, I can actually hear her. It's incredibly quiet, super comfortable, soaks up the bumps. There's a lot of features like blind spot warning. There's a blind spot. If it detects a car, it will shake the steering wheel and it'll beep at you and it'll actually move the steering a little bit and say, hey, you shouldn't turn that way. It's overly aggressive. It's tuned to like really, really safe drivers. So if you're driving around Los Angeles and you're used to kind of sneaking in here, you don't want to ruin anybody's day or impede their progress. But sometimes you're driving around in Los Angeles, you have to make quick decisions and fit into spaces because there's no other way. So the Telluride often says, I don't think so. I think you should be a really safe driver and wait till there's a space, which will never, ever happen.
Right.
So on occasion, you have to turn those systems off or else they just kind of beep at you all the time.
Just have a preset setting called LA and you just push it.
Exactly. It's probably no better or worse than other systems because all new cars have a lot of this stuff. Yeah. The thing that I really liked was on the SX trim level, you can get, I think it's standard. It has when you choose the turn signals, it'll show a camera pointing backwards in the center between in your gauge cluster. So like on the Honda, it shows it in the infotainment system. Yes. On the Kia, it shows you directly on your gauge cluster, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, it's way better. I mean, I think that's probably the way other manufacturers are going to move towards it. It's really quite convenient.
Yeah, my sister-in-law's Pilot's like that. So you turn on the turn signal, and the whole infotainment system is now this giant computer or this giant video camera that's looking out to make sure you're not going to hit anybody.
And it's like, well, what if I want to change my track at that point? I want to listen to something different. It's like, no.
But right in front of you, like in your line of vision, basically, that's probably the smarter way to go.
Yeah.
So it has one of those full, like, I guess you would call it like a LED gauge. It's not even a gauge cluster, I guess, anymore at this point. This computer screen that's in front of you, like, well, I'm thinking like the new Mercedes, what the heck is it called, the A class or whatever? Like, it has that whole, it's all digitized, not like retro style, like C4 Corvette, but like you can just change it to do whatever it wants. It's just a computer screen basically.
Well, this one isn't. This one has the center of the gauge cluster is a display, but there's actually two real gauges on either side. Mm-hmm. So not on, like there's other cars where the whole screen is taken over, but this does have two actual gauges.
Okay, I thought it did.
So it's not overwhelming. And I think sometimes cars can take that a little too far where there's too much customization, there's too much going on, and you really just kind of need it to show you the basics. Like, how fast am I going? I don't need everything.
Yeah. How fast am I going? Am I running out of gas? Is my car overheating?
Yeah, because I think it's a perfect place for car manufacturers to find ways to distract drivers. And I don't know. In some ways, it's the way the cars are moving to, but in other ways, it seems like, and I'm sure probably the reason why they're doing it is because it's, at this point, displays are so much cheaper than actually making physical gauges. Well, I can't say that for sure, but I think it's probably moving that way where displays, there's so many displays out in the world and iPads and computers that the cost is probably getting so low that it's easier to just pay a designer to come up with a design for the display than it is to put some actual physical moving parts.
Yeah, no,
you know,
I agree 100% on that one. That's most likely going to be what we'll see. You know, maybe 10 years down the line, the cheapest new car that you could buy, whatever it'll be, it's going to
Mirage. Mitsubishi Mirage. It's still going to be the Mirage.
No, the Mirage is still going to stay the way it is. But maybe the next cheapest, maybe the next Versa will have just a full on LCD, everything.
Yeah, the Telluride's cool. I'll do a full review of this. Actually, I'm going to do 2 videos with this vehicle. One of them where we're taking the road trip out to Big Bear, and I'll go into in-depth review of the car and all the features and what I liked about it. And there's obviously no car is perfect. It's really good. But there are a few little small things that were not my favorite. But I'd say in general, they're going to sell a lot of them. Nice. Yeah, so youtube.com/HelloRoad. In a couple of weeks will be a couple of videos on it.
Telluride.
The Telluride. To hell you ride.
To hell you ride. Oh, that somebody's got to get that license plate. That would be so awesome. So it's a slow car and lumberous. Did you drive it fast?
Well, this is my first press car that I've ever received in my life, so I don't want it to be the last. So I didn't drive it.
But just spirited.
Well, I mean, I tried. Well, yeah, there's a sport mode, which for a somewhat large SUV doesn't really do a whole lot. It just kind of keeps the revs hanging a little bit, so you're not constantly shifting, and it tightens up the steering a little bit. Almost barely noticeable. But when I was coming back down the mountain from Big Bear, I did put it in sport mode just because when it's not in sport mode, you're like cranking the wheel a ton around these tight turns, and it's super light steering in comfort mode. So that does kind of help it a little bit on some curvy roads. So even though I guess I wish that it had some sort of customization where I could just change the steering and not the transmission shift mapping. Just because going down those turns, it would be nice to be able to have a little bit tighter, so you're not just constantly cranking your arms
back and forth.
Yeah. But I did drive it spiritedly. It's not a quick vehicle. Well, I mean, I take that back. It's 0 to 60 in about 7 seconds, which by the standards of the cars that we're usually interested in, 80s cars, it's a race car. But by today's standards, SUV, that's kind of average. Not average isn't the right way to put it, but it's like the Pilot is quicker. I think the CX-9 might be quicker. I'd have to look that up. I don't remember. But I think off the line, it's pretty quick. When you're trying to pass somebody on the freeway, or you're trying to just mash the throttle to go get around somebody, that's where it really shows some weakness, where there's a pretty big lag before it starts to accelerate after you hit the throttle. It's like sometimes it feels like a half a second, which seems kind of unacceptable.
Yeah.
But most people aren't driving it like that.
Right.
And the other thing that I didn't like, which also is a thing that most people won't experience, is like, let's say you mash the throttle, you're trying to get around somebody, and then you have to quickly let off the throttle. The revs hang for about a half a second. So the car continues to move forward for about a half a second after you've left your foot off of the throttle. And I understand that that's a phenomena that it's not even a phenomena. It's something that's programmed into the throttle mapping apparently to help with fuel efficiency and a few other things. But that's just weird. It's like when I'm driving my Scion XB, because it's an old car that doesn't have any of this stuff. It's just like it's actual throttle cable. When I press the gas, it goes. Immediately when I let it off, it stops. So it's responding to my inputs exactly how I want it to. So when you're driving a modern car that has the throttle program the way that this is, it's just a little disconcerting, at least initially, until you get used to it. But that's the one thing that I was like, oh, I don't really like that. But it's not specific to the Telluride. It may be kind of specific to some newer vehicles.
Yeah. I've heard that with some just watching or reading reviews of some newer cars, it's across the gamut of everything from SUVs to regular passenger cars and some sporty cars too, where this whole rev hang phenomenon is going on. And the Fit doesn't have that, and it's a newer car, but it's also like a cheap ass economy car.
Sure.
So it's not that fancy. Maybe the CVT does, but mine doesn't have it. So I don't know. That would be kind of discerning, like letting off the gas and it's still accelerating for like half a second. You're like, oh, wait.
Sure. Well, and that was only noticeable when you were really mashing the throttle. Okay. Because whatever it was programmed was probably thinking, hey, well, why would you immediately let off like that? But because most of the time you're not going to be doing that. But so like the Fit, is that an actual physical throttle cable?
No. It's not. Okay. I wasn't sure. It's throttle by wire.
It is. Okay.
But it doesn't have that rev hangy thing that I guess the CVT one does. But I haven't driven a CVT one. So
I guess what I'd like to know, question for our listeners, if anybody knows, I'd like to know what percentage of vehicles actually, experience rev hang if their vehicles have that. And how many vehicles are actually still manufactured with actual throttle cables versus throttle by wire? I don't really know what the answer to that.
I think it's none.
None.
I would be hazard to guess to say it's none. I think everybody's gone to like the throttle by wire. I know that was kind of a newish thing back in the 90s. I think Mercedes and BMW were kind of the pioneers with it, and then everybody else started getting into it. Maybe the Mirage.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe the Mirage.
That's something I'm going to have to look up or somebody can just tell me if they listen to this and they want to send me a message on Instagram or Twitter or something. Go. That's something I don't know the answer to, and it would be kind of fun to figure that out.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this is kind of a slow car. We're talking about sort of trying to drive it fast. So maybe that's a good segue into our topic of the day, since we've been talking for a good 24 minutes. We haven't got to the topic of the day yet, but that's fine.
That's fine.
Yeah. We had to talk about the Telluride for a little bit because it was pretty damn good.
Yeah, well, that's good too. Yeah. And it's awesome that you got to experience this as your first press car and everything, first of many. And it was cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing about it.
Sharing is caring. So let's segue into the slow car fast. So I have a question for you. What's the fastest car you've driven or you've driven in recent memory? I'm just curious because I don't think I've asked you that before.
That's a good question. Fastest car I've driven.
Your Fox body? Oh, you didn't have a Fox body. You had a SN.
I had an SN95. I actually think the fastest car I drove. This is when I was at CarMax, 2007 911 Turbo with it was before the PDK, so it was just like the Tiptronic, I think is what they called it.
Yeah.
And it's in LA, so there's like traffic everywhere. So I didn't really get to experience much of it.
Freeway on-ramp, maybe?
Yeah, but there was a stoplight. So
okay.
Yeah, well, I know. And it was all-wheel drive, so it wasn't like the true experience. I think that's probably the most quickest thing I've driven in recent memory that I can remember.
And I was also going to ask you, what's the slowest car you've ever driven? Curious if it's one that's currently in your stable.
No,
it's not. Okay.
I would say no. Slowest car would be, I had a friend in high school who had a 1969 VW bus.
Okay, yes, those are slow.
We drove that thing from where I grew up in Glendora up to San Francisco after high school.
Oh, and it took 4 years.
It took 4 days.
Yeah. Yikes.
The slowest car I've ever driven was that bus.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny. I can't remember what the fastest car I've driven, but I would at least say in recent memory it was the Civic Type R.
Oh, yeah.
And then slowest. Oh, my Datsun. Yeah, the B210. That's the slowest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was curious if you had some thoughts on this, because I was thinking about, like, I could talk about the Civic Type R and maybe how that compares to my Nova, which is like, there's nobody else in the world that would ever try to compare a Civic Type R to a 1988 Chevy Nova twin cam, because that just wouldn't ever happen. Maybe some of the listeners of this podcast might try to do that. I think they share some of our taste in vehicles.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, my take on this is it's an interesting one, because I obviously prefer driving a slower car fast, because something like the Charade, I can drive that car reasonably at 7 out of 10 on the city streets without an issue. And that's still fun. It still gives you a little bit of thrill, which isn't super high, but it's enough to kind of like I give just a little taste of, oh, I feel like I'm breaking the law, and then you look down at the, at
Yeah.
the speedometer.
37. Whoa.
I'm going 40.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing is that like part of the allure to it is that the limits are so much lower and it's so much lower risk.
Yeah.
Just risk to
Yeah.
yourself, risk to other people,
Right.
risk to like, yeah.
I'm not condoning speeding or anything like that, but like, if you're a driving enthusiast, freeway on-ramps are like the best thing ever. Even in my little scrappy charade that who knows how many horsepower it has now, probably 20.
Yeah.
It's just so much fun ripping that thing up the on-ramp and going through the gears and getting onto the freeway and stuff. It's always like, people still don't let you on the freeway when you're like doing 65 by the time you get up there, and it's like, why aren't you going 65 miles an hour already? Get it? I'm getting up here, and that's just the way I feel about it. But yeah, the risk versus reward, like that's kind of, not to deviate too much from it, but kind of brings up a bad Fiesta ST memory.
Okay.
Yes, of a couple. Okay. So this is one of them.
Well, that's a fast-ish car. Would you describe it as that?
Yeah, I did. I mean, in comparison to the stuff I was used to driving, I mean, I had come from the Mazda 2 at that point, and going from a car with 100 horsepower to a car with 197 horsepower was basically the same car because they shared the same chassis. It was a hell of a difference, and that was a car that I kind of learned, if you have a car that is capable of like throwing you back in the seat, right? And I remembered this with my Mustang. If you have a car that's capable of just totally pressing your back into the seat, that feeling you get the first couple times you give it gas and you do it, like maybe right after you bought it or after the braking period, like it was for the ST, it's an amazing feeling. And you're like, oh, I love this. This is great. But at least for me, I don't know if this happens to other people out there, over time, you get used to it. And then your fast car is not fast anymore. You have to either upgrade it, or I don't know what you would do. But like, that's what happened to me. And that's one of the things that really kind of was like, I guess, the nail in the coffin. I say this now, but who knows, it might change in the future. But the nail in the coffin for me for wanting to own a super fast car is like a daily. I mean, given there are cars I would love to own one day, but I'm going into it now knowing that feeling will go away. If I get my dream E39 M5 and with its 400 horsepower, and just the days of flogging the crap out of it will get really boring, because it's like, oh yeah, it's just going fast, but I'm used to it. That's just kind of my weird view of it.
Well, that's actually kind of a good point where you want to try to maintain the fun. And well, I mean, what I was thinking is, kind of going back to the Civic Type R for a second. So this is 306 horsepower, 0 to 60 in about 5 seconds. And just, anybody that drives this thing is just praises how great it handles. So I think the chassis makes it incredibly easy to drive quickly. And it gives you a ton of confidence too. So I do think that, like what you said, at some point you might start to get to the limits of, or you might start to reach like speeds that might get you into trouble.
Oh yeah.
Speeds that might send you to jail.
Yes.
So I think that's part of like, maybe not necessarily growing tired of it, but if you're reaching the limits of the vehicle, or you're reaching the limits of the roads before you're reaching the limits of the vehicle. So you're kind of like leaving a lot on the table. Freeway on-ramps are a ton of fun. Stoplight to stoplight's a ton of fun. But if you're going to get to the point where your one move is going to be catastrophic because you're going so fast, like in a Civic Type R, you can get going so fast so quickly that one wrong move and then you could be in a really catastrophic event, versus like you're in your Daihatsu, if your limits are at 40 miles an hour, I guess the catastrophe would be less of the speed, it would be more of maybe the lack of safety gear that your Daihatsu has.
Right. Yeah, and that's...
So maybe in the end it's equal, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is like there's a certain, I don't know, you kind of get bummed out because if you're just playing freeway on ramp, like this happened to me in the ST rather quickly. It's like, okay, first gear is like nothing, and then you shift into second, and second's where all the fun is, and you're like, yeah, this is great fun. And then you're going, oh shit, I'm doing 85 miles an hour and I'm not even on the freeway yet. And
Yeah,
that's when it's like,
exactly.
okay, and then stop. It's like just a split second and then it's over. So
Sure.
at least, I mean,
Well,
not a split second, a couple seconds, and that's where I was just like, and I'm just commuting in this thing.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that's when I drove the Type R for those couple days. I did take it on some back roads, and like I said, you're reaching if it's a tight back road, like a really tight back road. The car is it's so good at getting around that you're definitely going to reach the limits of the road before you reach the limits of the car. But then if you take it on like a sweeping back road like Angela's Crest, then you risk going so fast that you might just end up just careening off the side of the hill like that Subaru did a few years ago, you know. But then I was thinking, okay, let's compare that, like those cars, like the ST, the Focus, the Fiesta ST and the Civic Type R, those kind of cars, and then compare it to like the cars that we have or the cars that we have now. So I'm like my Nova twin cam, it's 2,200 pounds, 110 horsepower. So the power to weight ratio is like half of the Type R, and it's got 13-inch tires. It's funny because the other day I thought it had 14s, but it actually has 13. I don't know why I thought it had 14s. It was just wishful thinking, I guess. The guest we had a few weeks ago was Derek Powell. He has a Cayman GT4, and I was parked next to his vehicle, and I noticed that his brake rotors were larger than my wheels. So, like, okay, yeah. So that way you can really kind of get into perspective, like what the limits of my Nova twin cam are to something like a Cayman GT4,
right?
And it's I can reach the limits of the twin cam at super low speeds, and that's what I like about it. And it's still a lot of fun because it's got a super revvy motor, revs to 7,500 RPM, and it's easy to push 13-inch tires to their limit. You know. Oh, and also the suspension design of my twin cam is so much more basic than a Type R. And it's easier to kind of find the limits of that, whereas the Type R was designed to like making it so you can't ever reach those limits. So it's also made me remember I think I sent you a link to this episode, the Driving While Awesome podcast episode, where they were talking about their experience in the Porsche 718 Cayman S. My coworker has one, and I actually haven't had the pleasure of driving his car. I'm not sure if he'll let me, but he takes it on some back roads out by like Agoura Hills, Westlake Village area in Southern California. And the chassis is so amazing. It pretty much solves all your problems for you, where you don't really have to do it that much work. He used to own the E46 that I bought from him.
Okay.
And it was really easy to see like how much better the Porsche was than the E46. It's funny because the E46 kind of feels like crap compared to the Porsche, but the E46 actually itself is amazing. So like it just shows you how like at what level the Cayman is.
Right.
But the thing he was mentioning is that it's faster. It's certainly the Cayman's faster, but is it more fun than the E46? I'm not sure, and it makes it so there's less involvement for you. You're not as involved in like, getting the car down the road. There's less you have to do because the chassis is just sorting everything out for you,
And that could be great for some drivers out there, but
yeah,
for myself personally, I think it's way better if you have to work for it. So, if a car that has a chassis that's not meant for it, for example, like a car I may own, when you drive it hard, and then when you drive it hard in the canyons, it's actually really fun because it's so involving. Because it's like, okay, these are tiny little tires, these brakes suck, and there's no power, and we're going up a hill. But when you're done with it, like there's a sense of accomplishment. I remembering a long time ago when I had my Mustang and I was doing a lot of driving up in the canyons. My friend had a Nissan 240 SX, and I think I got to drive it before he had swapped it, because he did swap it to an SR20 motor. But so it was just the stock KA motor. And one night we switched keys, and I remember driving that car down the hill, and I was like, I mean, it wasn't, I think it was even a year or two older than my Mustang was, but I was like, this thing is so easy to drive because the chassis was just so better suited for that sort of stuff. I can't even imagine what like a brand new Porsche or like a GTR would feel like driving some of these canyon roads. It's like you got to work for it to have a lot of fun, or you can go really, really fast. And that's kind of the way things are now. I mean, I don't know. It's just
Well, the really fast vehicles, like, so my other coworker has a Mustang GT 350, and he pretty much never drives it. Part of it's because he only lives a few miles away from work, and the only time you can really stretch the legs with that is on freeway on ramps. But he doesn't actually need to take the freeway to get to work, so and he just doesn't ever bother to really like drive it fast anywhere, because I think to get to the limits of what that car is capable of, you got to take it to a track. So I'm thinking that so many cars are just overkill.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Because people buy into this idea of what the capabilities of the vehicles are. This happens all the time. They buy into the idea of like, you're buying into the capabilities and not what you're actually going to do with a car.
Usable.
You're like, you got tons of soccer moms and soccer dads that buy SUVs that, even though most of the time they're probably just going to be commuting to work, people buy RVs that they're sitting for 11 months out of the year, and why people buy boats. It's like, race cars too. It's like, I have a Liam Neeson race car, and that probably sits 360 days out of the year just in my garage, But I mean, that's different. But I think like, there's also the idea of like, just the prestige factor, like some people want to know, or they want their neighbors to know, or they want to know that they've got the most capable machine possible.
Right.
And it's maybe less about knowing that you're going to have fun in the car, but it's more about status and status symbol. Just in the end, I think a lot of people maybe just need to realize that you don't ever really need those capabilities unless you're going to take it to a racetrack, which is what nobody's going to do. Otherwise, you're like, my coworker with the GT 350, he's never going to reach even what a fraction of that car is capable of.
Right.
Not even on a freeway on-ramp. Maybe the on-ramp's too short, It's just you just driving around knowing that you've got the flat plane V8 and it sounds amazing, and knowing that it has all these capabilities, and knowing that your neighbor might know that, and but the funny thing is that doesn't make me not want to get a 911 turbo. I still totally want a 911 turbo.
Yeah, but you're in a different what's the word I'm looking for? You're like kind of in a different demographic though with it, because you would drive the car to enjoy it the way it's meant to be enjoyed, and I can see you wanting to go and maybe take a track day with it or something like that. Versus just like trophy car sitting in my garage.
Sure.
And that's the kind of thing too, that it's like people need to realize they don't need a 707 horsepower Dodge Hellcat.
No.
I mean, they're cool, don't get me wrong, and it makes all sorts of cool noises and cool sounds, but it's really a toy at that point. I mean, that's the way I look at it. Unless you drag race your Hellcat or maybe road race it or something. I don't know why I'm picking on the Hellcat. It's just the first thing that came to my mind.
Because it's cool, but so stupid.
Yeah,
like it's such a stupid vehicle. There's no reason for it to exist, but I'm glad that it does.
Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculous. And if you want to show everybody that you have the most ridiculous vehicle available, you buy that one.
So this whole slow car thing really resonated with me a long time ago. I mean, I guess you can say it's a long time ago. Basically,
me too, for sure.
Yeah, I think the late 90s, I got my, the late 90s, throughout the 90s, I didn't really have a whole ton of access to the internet and stuff like that. So a lot of my automotive news and stuff came via the various magazines I had subscribed to. And kind of cutting to the chase on this, there was I had subscribed to VW Trends because, as we all know, I have that wonderful 1970 Volkswagen Beetle. And one of the episodes, one of the issues had a story about the Volkswagen Lupo Cup, and I was like, "What the heck is this?" And the Lupo was a little, of course, little crappy econo box that Volkswagen made for the European market, but Volkswagen themselves had actually went out and made like a racing series just for those little cars. And I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. And that was in like 98, I think I saw that. And
that sounds about right.
That's kind of the first time I was like, well, wait a minute here. Race cars don't have to be Formula One cars or Indy cars, NASCARs. They can be this little thing. And then that kind of was one of the things that opened up the door. That was around the same time that the great Gran Turismo came into my life and kind of really blew things open. But that's when I was like, there can be it's not just like Herbie, who's like, a fantasy. And I knew it was a fantasy because it's like, no, the Volkswagen's not going to go as fast as that.
Yeah.
Whatever the hell it was he was racing against. But that's really what kind of blew the doors open for me with it and kind of really shaped where I am right now, sitting here doing this podcast about slow cars fast, is because of that little article about the Lupo Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And then, throughout, since then, obviously, the power of the internet, been able to see all sorts of different things. And people have been doing that for years. The Ford was running the Pintos back in the day with like the Trans Am series. And it was like, what the hell? It's a Pinto, but it was there. It's always like the lesser of the car is always the one I kind of root for. Like, thinking of like, professional racing, like, the I don't know what the hell it's called now, but it used to be the Speed World Challenge. And then it was before that was Speed Vision World Challenge.
I can't remember what it's called now.
They had like the touring car and then GT. I was always like all about the touring cars because it was just like
the
Mazda proteges, like that Tri-Point Engineering used to run. They were so badass, and it was just like, oh, that's awesome, because that's like this very similar to like the idea of I'm going to go buy a new base model commuter car and turn it into a race car. That's always been so much more appealing to me than like, I'm going to go buy a 911 and turn it into a race car. I don't know.
Sure.
Not that I wouldn't want a 911 race car, but given the choice, I would probably go with some, Honda Fit B-spec car or something like that.
Sure. Well, and I think the other thing is like, I got into spec Miata racing because of the price point, at the time it was maybe almost the cheapest racing you could get into, maybe the cheapest. It's not that anymore, I don't think, but I got into it because of that. But then that sort of made me start to appreciate it a little bit more, at least solidify this idea of slow car fast, where you did, like you talk about with your charade, it definitely gives you a sense of accomplishment knowing that, one of the first times I took my Miata on the racetrack, I was like slaying Corvettes in the corners. And like, I wasn't even a very good driver. And I was just keeping up and like, just like pissing all these Corvettes off in my stupid little, 100 horsepower NA Miata. And then of course they would smoke me on the straightaways and I would catch right back up to them in the turns. But it was just kind of fun knowing that you could have a vehicle that was capable of, and obviously that's a lot of the chassis and everything, but you could have this little, puny motor allowing you to, piss off these big rumbling V8s in the corners. And that's one of the things that really got me into this idea. But I think even maybe before that, I was thinking back towards like, it was my first vehicle. My first vehicle was a 83 Ford Econoline. And when you're a kid, at least when I was a kid, everybody wants to drive fast. So I had to improvise with what I had. So I had this full-size van. It's like, okay, let's see if I can push this as hard as I can. It bit me in the ass a few times, but I almost went off the road a few times, but luckily didn't. But yeah, it's one of those things where I just try to deal with what I had, and I wanted to drive fast, but there was no other alternatives for me at that point.
Yeah.
So
it's the same sort of thing with my Volkswagen Beetle. It's like, I know it's not a fast car, but
sure,
being 16 years old and given the freedom and given you're behind the wheel of a car, and especially with me, with my history with the car and my Herbie love and everything, there were times when I was like, maybe it can go fast. Then I would try, and it would be like, nah, it doesn't go that fast.
No, it's not capable of that.
It's not capable of that. Not at all. But yeah, I mean, it's always been a big thing for me it's like rooting for the underdog and like the racing and just in the series too. Cause even getting into autocross and all that, like I purposely bought a base Cooper. I could have bought a Cooper S, but I bought the base one because I felt there was more what's the word I want to say on this? How do I want to say it? I just felt that there was more. I'm trying to make this big, nice word up, and I can't come to my mind. We're not even drinking. But
Sure.
no, it just.
Well, I would help you, but I have been drinking. So.
I wanted to bring it out there to prove to everybody that the car was just as capable as the Cooper S was, and other cars that were out there. And
sure,
that was kind of my thought process with it. And it was the same sort of thought process I had with the Mazda 2. I remember getting laughed at an autocross the first time I went with it, and everybody's like, what the hell is that guy doing with a Mazda 2? And like, it was a bunch of S2000s and Evos, and I was like, okay. And I go out and did my first run, and they're like, oh shit, okay. It's like, it's one of those things that's the best.
Well, moment. It's also sort of like the idea, which we talked about this before, the idea of taking a car doing something with a car that it wasn't designed to do this task, like taking a car on the Gambler 500 or taking a Mazda 2 and autocrossing it, trying to find the limits of these cars where it wasn't designed for that. It does give you more of a sense of accomplishment, more of a sense of like, it's more about what you're putting into it with your driving skills versus what the car is giving you. So yeah, you might be able to go faster in a Fiesta ST, but perhaps getting the last tenths out of a Mazda 2 on an autocross track might be more rewarding.
Yep.
And I was also thinking about like it kind of reminds me of a little bit of Lemons, where you're taking all these cars that shouldn't be on race tracks, and there's a lot of good vibes around that too, where you're really trying to push a lot of the, not all the cars in Lemons are slow, but many of them are, and it is pushing those cars over a series of many hours. Those slow cars over many hours to do well is also a great sense of accomplishment. So I guess the other thing too is that when I was thinking back about like, you get off from the on track stuff back onto the street. Mm-hmm. I've never been a huge fan of driving incredibly fast on public roads. Right. I mean, I was when I was younger because I didn't have the sense to think about other people. But nowadays, I really don't want to cause a wreck, and I really don't want to hurt anybody else. That's one of the reasons why I'm kind of into the slow cars, because I can get to the limits of this car and not be going that much over the speed limit, and not really being a nuisance or a threat to other cars on the roads. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I got into racing, is because I didn't want to do this on the street.
Right.
But it is nice if you want to have a little bit of fun on a back road and not hurt anybody or hurt yourself. That's just the perfect place for a slow, crappy car.
Mm-hmm. No, it really is. And it's kind of funny. I was thinking about this the other day when for those few months that I owned that E46 that I had, it was 325, so it wasn't incredibly fast, 170 horsepower when it was new. The whole time I owned that car, I drove it so carefully, not because I was afraid of hurting it, but I was just like, I didn't want to have that BMW driver perception. and I drove it so carefully.
Sure.
So that was that. And then I got the Fit. And then first couple weeks I got used to the Fit. Now I drive the thing kind of like a bat out of hell. Sure. Just because that it's fun. And, I look down and like, I'm doing, 75, it's not horrible, but that's kind of, and it just zips about and does all little Honda Fit things where it can easily get scooted in and out of traffic on the freeway and everything. So I was like, I drive the Fit more like a a typical BMW driver
sure.
than I did when I owned the BMW. So,
but you use your turn signals. So
I did. And I thought about that too with the BMW. I was going to get a license plate frame or something that says this BMW driver uses his turn signals.
Yeah. So that's a fun topic. I never really try to solidify my thoughts on it, but it's one of those ideas that I've probably had since I had my first car. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of traveled through all of the cars that I've owned, most of the cars that I've owned. I haven't really had that many extremely fast vehicles. They've all been kind of slow, mostly slow, crappy cars. Mm-hmm. And that's probably without even thinking about it. It's just the way, what I had, really been drawn towards. So,
yeah, no, same with me. I've had a couple, with my Mustang and with the Fiesta, and as fun as those were, it just seems like at the conclusion of the ownership for each of those, it was like, I don't need this. I don't need to go this fast. I don't need a car that can do this. I think, and as controversial as this may sound, I think probably 300 horsepower is all you really need. And that's if you have a big car. And you don't need anything more than that, really, to stay within the reasons. Now, if you're buying a car to purposely go have fun with as a weekend car or a track car, then go for whatever the whatever you want to do, really. But that just like automakers need to, like, I don't want to say tone it down, but
they do.
I
think that's exactly what they need to do. Like I would like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example, but I guess there may not be a huge market for it, but I think for enthusiasts that don't want to get into trouble, it would be nice if there was like the equivalent of a Porsche 912 or something, or a 914.
Yeah.
For today's enthusiasts.
Yeah, that would be amazing if they were to do something and have something entry level like that. No, that would be great.
Where you're still getting the idea of the engineering that goes into these cars, and it doesn't have to be a cheap car. It just needs to be like maybe purposely neutered. Where it's I think that the problem is that the Porsche, at least for Porsche, their brand is shifting from, it has shifted from enthusiasts to luxury, essentially, status. It always was status, but it's definitely like way more on the status side versus enthusiast, I think.
Yeah.
Or at least that's probably where the bulk of their sales is. I'm sure there's still obviously plenty of Porsche enthusiasts, but it seems like from the day they introduced the Cayenne, it was like, okay, this is where the money is. This is where the focus is going to be. I don't know. I'm not a Porsche expert, so everybody's probably going to disagree with me. So, and next week I'll probably change my mind about this, since I'm kind of talking out of my ass at this point.
No. I mean, I agree with you on it, though. I think that a lot of the companies, they had to change their ways. Porsche made small little cars for club racing and whatnots in the 60s and the 70s. Then they were reasonably obtainable by a normal person. And nowadays, I mean, I haven't looked at base prices, but I know they're not cheap, and I know it's not something that I could even ever consider buying a brand new one, unless I win the lottery, and even then, I don't know if I'd buy one. But it's just one of those things, and I think if automakers were to, I guess you would say, follow in suit with like Mazda, where they offer a sporty car that's at the right price with the right amount of power, that's there for enthusiasts, that would be the sweet spot right there. But it's, a neutered down, maybe just a reimagining the 924, 944, 960.
Sure. I think, as we're talking through this, I'm kind of thinking like, I'm just curious, like how many people would actually buy something like that? Are we sort of in the minority that we appreciate the capabilities of of slowness, where most people are into the idea of buying
Hellcats.
Overkill. Yeah.
Overkill. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. The overkill needs to, I mean, it can stay there. That's fine, because it's cool, I guess, but tone it down, guys. Tone it down.
Tone it down, man.
No, seriously though, for anybody out there, like drive the slowest, go drive the slowest car you can and see how
drive it as fast as you can.
No, without breaking too many speed limits.
Exactly.
Or hurting yourself or others. But no,
exactly.
It's seriously so much more enjoyable, I think, to ring out the revs in a little crappy car than it is to like barely tap the throttle on a Fiesta ST on a freeway on-ramp, and then before you know it, you're doing 85 miles an hour and you might get pulled over, and it's not cool. But it would be a lot of fun on the racetrack, but every day is not a racetrack. Every day is life, where you're commuting and going and getting groceries or whatever the case may be. So, but yes. So, dear listeners, go drive something slow.
Buy a Daihatsu is what we're saying.
Buy a Daihatsu. I wonder if that one's still for sale up in Portland.
I don't know.
I'm going to have to check.
I don't need any more cars, so I'm not going to check. It's speaking of sort of fast cars that I shouldn't be taking delivery of. I am going to be getting that 944 Turbo soon. I think in September. So in a couple weeks, I'm going to have that here. So we'll have to see how it is having a somewhat fast vehicle. It's not as fast as the Civic Type R, but it's pretty quick.
I'm excited.
Well, I might take that back. I feel like it might be almost as fast as I don't know. This is when I'm starting to doubt myself. I think I have too much beer, and then I'm starting to like. It's funny. I think alcohol usually like creates confidence for most people. It sort of like inhibits it for me. I start to doubt myself towards the end of a beer. Yep.
I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be about the same because those cars. I call them like the sneaky Pete of cars because it's just like people don't notice how fast those things are for the day. I mean, they're what, 250 horsepower?
Yeah, and I think this one has it's funny. I don't even know exactly what it has, but it should be. I think it's a little bit more than that because there's a few additional. Maybe that's a bigger turbo. I can't remember.
Yeah.
This is a car that I bought with co-own with Bradley Brownell, and I don't know anything about it, so that's going to be fun. So yeah, it's probably going to be pretty quick. Pretty quick.
Pretty quick. Yep. Well, it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
That's
all right. Well,
not a slow car.
Yeah, that's not a slow car. So we'll see if my opinion changes on this, how long I'll own this one. We'll see.
Yep.
All right. I guess that's it for our slow car fast episode.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. So let's talk about the social medias. I think everybody knows by now, but we can go over it again. Where can everybody find you on the interwebs?
You can find me at Paul's Finest Hour on Instagram and on Twitter.
Nice.
Yes.
Yep. And I'm at youtube.com/Hello Road or Mr. Ethan Tufts on Instagram and Twitter. And again, if you are feeling generous and you'd like to maybe help us out a little bit, we'd certainly appreciate a quick review or a quick rating on iTunes or your favorite podcast listening provider. That would mean a lot to us.
Yes.
Because this is a fun podcast to do. We want to be able to continue doing it. And spreading the word out to other people would really help us out a whole lot. So thank you in advance.
Thank you.
Yep. So I guess that's it for tonight. I guess that's it for today, depending on when you're listening. Could be tonight, could be today, could be tomorrow. I'm not sure.
Could be yesterday.
Could be yesterday. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.
Bye.